All right, good afternoon. My name is Zack Poole with Paragon Films, and I am the State Territory Manager for Georgia with responsibilities in bleed over in Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Florida. Um, Today we're going to be looking over equipment. This is going to piggyback on our previous webinars. I hope you've had a chance to take a listen to the Paragon lineup. We've gone through each one of the machine films as well as the hand films. We briefly discussed in the machine film presentations how optimization of machines and equipment can really increase the cost savings for the customer using specific films. Today, we're going to look at how that optimization, those audits, how we perform those, and what we're looking for and how we can hopefully help correct current film and equipment out in the field. So today, we're going to look at different types of stretch wrappers, key components, how to load film, specifically the film carriage and its components, photo eyes, clamps, wipe down arms, a little bit of common problems and problem solving skills that we can do, as well as pre-stretch, on pallet stretch, and specifically the order and what we're looking at as we do a film audit with you and your customer. So the first thing we need to look at is different types of stretch wrapping equipment. I know that most of you are very familiar with the options that you can provide to a customer for a brand new stretch wrapper. There's some great domestic manufacturers here that make great equipment, and you may be a little more familiar with certain types as opposed to others. So on your left-hand side, this is an overhead ring. So this is designed for high throughput, high RPM, super fast speeds, trying to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 pallets an hour out the door. Most of these pieces of equipment can run up to 65 plus RPMs. So super fast, requiring films that have great unwind speeds and need something that can take that much startup force and rotational speed. In the middle is the rotary arm. So a bunch of manufacturers that we work with will have a rotary arm available for your customers. The great advantage of this system is you can use forklifts or pallet jacks. Your worker doesn't have to get off of the forklift. Traditionally, there's a lanyard system that's provided with these, or a remote system. You have great, wrapping speed RPMs. These will sometimes be up into the mid 20s, depending on how fast they're dialed in for. Great option without having to step up to an overhead ring. And then on the right-hand side is the most common piece of equipment I see every day, which is a semi-automatic turntable. So looking at this piece of equipment, this picture that you see, this is a high-profile turntable. Traditionally, these can have excessive weights, somewhere 4,000 or 5,000 pounds that it's rated for, whereas a low-profile turntable is going to have less pounds that it can handle. A high-profile turntable is going to be great for forklifts, whereas the low-profile will accept pallet jacks with ramps and such. On the left-hand side of this is the orbital wrapper. So this is a piece of equipment that will wrap vertically, compressing from the top to the bottom, wrapping the four sides from top to bottom. Traditionally, these are in line with systems coming next, like a fully automatic turntable or a fully automatic rotary arm. A customer may need an orbital wrapper if they're stacking two pallets to pallets that are different, needing compressional force downward without strapping. So that will transition us into the fully automatic turntable. This is an inline system with conveyors, works just are very similar to that semi-automatic turntable, except the whole deck of the inline conveyor system rotates with the pallet. And then you move to the fully automatic rotary arm. This is a large rotary arm that has the inline system that allows a conveyor or faster throughput, centralizing all of the pallets into one area, limiting the amount of forklift traffic to and from the wrapper. So stretch wrapping equipment, the key components that we're going to look at today are on the left-hand side of the screen: the tower, the control panel, wipe arm, clamp, turntable, and the film carriage. But really our job when we come to do an audit and before we perform a film analysis is we need to understand how this specific piece of equipment is working. Is it operating at the highest potential that it can? Because we need to make sure that we are well aware of not just the film, but the equipment. We need to know how that machine works. Is it in working order or not? How can we fix it to get it optimized? We need to be able to diagnose and solve issues related to the process and the performance of how that piece of equipment works. So one of the first things that we do when we perform an audit, after we look at current settings of the film and pieces of those key components, is we're going to look at the film. How is the film loaded on the machine? Because cling is one of the major components to stretch film. It helps keep film connected together with other layers of film on the same pallet. It also helps provide that containment force against the product to keep the pallet upright and in perfect condition. So one thing that I've run into in my 2 years with Paragon is I actually had a customer that called me in, was very upset, had been buying Paragon film for about 2 years, and said that we must have cut the resin or cheaped out on something because the film was awful. They had pallets sticking together. They've never seen film so bad. They wanted a refund and they just wanted us gone. So she really called me down there to pick up the film and get rid of it. So I started the audit looking at how she loaded the film, and I asked her, you know, how have you been loading the film? Well, we always load this film arrows up. I said, okay, that's fine. After I determined the cling on the film, I determined that where they were loading arrows up, they really needed to be loading the film arrows down. Somebody had flipped the sign that was on the piece of equipment, and all of her pallets were sticking together. The film was not performing properly. It is just because somebody had flipped the signage of the equipment, and the customer didn't understand where and how cling on stretch film actually worked. So the first thing that we're going to do to determine the cling of a film, or where the cling is on the roll, is we are going to pull out about 2 feet or a foot of unstretched film off the roll. I'm going to fold it on top of each other on both the inside and the outside with 2 different trials. And if I fold it on the inside and I get resistance or tack or a little bit of cling feel to it, that's where your cling is going to be. Each manufacturer is going to have film that has cling maybe on the inside of the roll, maybe on the outside of the roll. It all depends on the process they use and how the cores are oriented. For example, Paragon's film will always have cling on the inside of the roll while you off roll the film. Whereas certain manufacturers that use maybe a blown process, the cling package for blown film is an additive, and it migrates outwards in the product as it sits. So you may have cling that's actually on the outside of the film for a blown product. Once we've determined that the cling is on either the inside or the outside of the roll, we're going to look at the equipment. Is it rotating clockwise or counterclockwise? This will affect how the film reacts once it passes through the carriage and how it's rolled onto the product. Then we're going to inspect the thread pattern and follow the film from roll through the carriage onto the pallet. The cling side should always be up against the product or the pallet. You don't ever want the cling on the outside, which my customer had the issue with some time ago. That's going to be how you determine whether or not the film needs to be loaded arrows up or arrows down. And this is going to vary on every piece of equipment for these steps. Your carriage may be on the left side of the tower, or the right side of the tower, or maybe on the front of the rotary arm or the back, or the turntable may be turning counterclockwise or clockwise. It can vary from manufacturer and piece of equipment. So just saying arrows up at a customer with 4 or 5 machines may not be accurate. So here's the wrap pattern. So you're very familiar probably, because most of the well-known brands of stretch film equipment are going to use either a W style pattern or an S style pattern. So traditionally, the W style pattern is referred to as an easy thread or a no thread or simple thread. This is traditionally a film carriage on the left-hand side of this picture that uses a gate with aluminum pinch rollers that are going to pinch the film in between the 2 drive rollers, more like a W. Whereas on the right-hand side, you see an S roller pattern where you actually have to physically wind the film through the carriage and snake it through. It looks more like an S pattern. So what are the benefits and disadvantages of these 2 systems? For a W style pattern, the benefit is you can load the film very easily. It's very safe. Traditionally, when that gate's open, you're not going to have the film being operational. There's a kill switch involved with that carriage being open. So you're not going to risk loss of limb by wrapping that pattern, but you're going to lose on surface contact from the film to the drive rollers. So that's where you're going to get most of your stretch. The more surface contact that you have with those drive rollers, the better that carriage is going to be able to stretch the film to the pre-stretch gear ratio. Whereas an S-style pattern, you're going to get great stretch. You're going to have a lot more film to roller contact surface area. But the issue is we've had people that may have wound the film, the machine kick into gear, and people have lost fingers, caught on jewelry, watches, rings, things like that. It's more time consuming to actually wind the film because you have to wrap it through. It takes maybe about twice as long to 3 times as long to get it into the correct operating window than a W style pattern does. So looking inside the carriage, so this is a very common carriage that you may see out on the market. Traditionally, there's a cover on top that is going to house the pre-stretch gears, maybe a cam sensor, a dancer bar, the photo eye on the left-hand side. Then you'll have the drive rollers, which are traditionally a rubberized durometer or rubberized roller. And then you have pinch rollers that are going to be aluminum attached to a door or a gate. Certain manufacturers actually have integrated a spring system into these pinch rollers to allow greater contact and pinch of that film against the drive rollers, increasing the surface area. So under the carriage cover, which we talked about, you're going to have your pre-stretch gears, your pre-stretch chains or belts, this is a belt and gear system. You'll see a tensioning device attached at the top that's going to give tension to either the chain or the belt. You'll have a dancer arm cam, which is going to work in direct relation with an analog sensor or a load cell. This specific model has the load cell inside the carriage. Others have them down on the lower side of the carriage at the bottom. So common components and issues that we're going to be looking at today are drive rollers, pinch rollers, dancer bars, load cells, drive chains, gears, the photo eyes, clamps, wiper arms, and belts. So common roller issues, we see this every day. People will have issues with their stretch film equipment. They're not getting enough stretch on the film. It seems very loose. It doesn't have great containment. Traditionally, that's going to point to an issue with drive rollers or pinch rollers. So the common roller issues that we see for drive rollers is having cuts or nicks, or they're very worn down. So you can see in the picture to the right, probably what has happened is film has been snapped back into the carriage and worn or rolled around the drive roller. Somebody has taken a straight razor or a blade and cut that film off. This introduces some slip into that rubberized coating, because under higher speeds, 8 to 10 RPMs, I believe this is a turntable, those gaps are actually going to widen, limiting the amount of surface contact on stretch film. Also, with pinch rollers, if the film is snapped back and wrapped itself around the aluminum pinch rollers, people can take blades and cut that off, causing burrs or cuts or sharp edges. Or if the springs in those carriages are loose, it can damage the effectiveness of the film contacting the drive rollers. So you're going to have more film breaks, increased film usage, lower containment, holes or straight up tears, more roll changes, higher cost per pallet, lower on pallet stretch, and lost productivity because of simple drive roller and pinch roller issues. An example from my time with Paragon, we installed a brand new Landtech QL400 to a customer. He has been using a very outdated piece of equipment. He installed the piece of equipment, loved it. Everything was great while we were there, got him optimized on the correct Paragon film for his load, and called us back about 3 weeks later and said, we got an issue. I'm not getting any stretch on my pallet. Thought that was odd because it was a brand new piece of equipment. So we went out there, and he had determined that we had left some factory material on the carriage that he needed to remove. He took a knife, and for about 4 hours, he cut off all of the drive roller durometer, or the rubberized portion of the drive roller, because he thought that it wasn't supposed to be there, and we just left it on when we installed the equipment. That was about a $1,200 to $1,500 replacement. He was not happy, but we solved his film issue by just replacing the drive rollers. So some solutions to these common roller issues. If it's on the aluminum pinch rollers, you can sand the burrs down with emery cloth or 400 grit sandpaper. I'm sure that your customer's maintenance team can handle that pretty well. If you'd like a factory trained technician to do that, or your customer would like that, it'd be a great way to value add and value sell PMs and equipment work. You can adjust or tighten spring hinges with the pinch rollers, and you can replace severely cut or worn rollers. You don't want to replace just one if you're going to replace it. Just like your tires, if you have one that's been very worn down, you want to replace at least two. You don't want to replace just one because the machine's not going to operate properly. All right, dancer bar and load cell issues. So the dancer bar works with the load cell and the pre-stretched gears inside the carriage to determine how much film should be paid out during the cycle. So if you've seen the dancer bar moving at the front side of the carriage, the more movement, the more that film is being paid out for a period and then stretched, paid out and then stretched, giving uneven tension to the film. And if the conditions aren't giving even tension, it can cause film breaks and tears. You can have performance issues with your containment and on-pallet stretch. One way to check for this is to check to find out if the load cell is out of calibration. Remove the film from the carriage, close the gate. If the film or if the drive rollers begin to spin slowly, you may have a load cell that's out of calibration. A factory trained technician should come in and do an audit of that, and they can tighten or loosen depending on what's needed. I like to think of it more as the dancer bar as a dance. You want that performing like a slow dance in middle school. You want it very steady, sometimes awkward, but very steady. You don't want a lot of movement. You don't want a salsa class in your film carriage. If it's moving back and forth, you're going to have a lot of film issues and inconsistent pallet wraps. So sprockets and chains, or gears and belts. So the two types of systems that we see in film carriages these days are sprockets and chains, or gears and belts. Issues that can arise with sprockets and chains: they have to be greased very well, and if a customer doesn't have your twice a quarter or once a quarter PMs, these gears can become gummed up. You could have excessive tension in the chain. You could have slop in the chain. Very loose chains are going to change the pre-stretch gearing for that equipment. Regular PMs should be able to diagnose these, and your customer should not ever have an issue working with their sprockets and chains. Gears and belts, what we look for is belt tension, whether the tensioner is in place properly. If there's any particle buildup, cracking of belts. We've had customers where there's no belt or chain actually in between the pre-stretch rollers. Essentially, they're just paying film on with zero stretch. You can see on the left-hand picture, there's the third sprocket that has made its way into the chain cycle, whereas on the right-hand side picture, you see the black tension wheel that is on the outside of the belt. On the left-hand side picture, that third wheel should actually be on the outside, providing tension to that chain, not pulling it away from the gears. They're losing a lot of pre-stretch gearing for that film. So what can you do? Adjust the tension of the wheel by tightening the belts or chains or the tensioning device. Clean or replace chains and belts if they're broken, damaged, or gummed up. Check for cracks, dry rot, or any tears that you can find in that equipment. Once again, a factory trained technician with his PMs should be able to diagnose all of these issues, and it's a great way to value add to your customer. So the photoelectric sensor, or the photo eye, that is embedded in the film carriage, traditionally in the housing at the top, it's an LED that registers the product by sending a signal and measuring distance. Once the carriage reaches the top of the load, the signal isn't going to be relayed back, and it's going to trigger the machine to start counting the top wraps. So if your customer has 3 top wraps set in for that recipe, the photo eye is going to measure the top of the load and begin those 3 top wraps. The issues that we've seen is height differences. Certain pieces of equipment and photo eyes that are working with pick and pull pallets from maybe a grocery distribution that have different heights for the top of the load may confuse the photo eye. It'll see the top of the pallet and then it'll find a box. So it gets confused where the top is. Some machines will wrap indefinitely until a customer interferes and causes the film carriage to go back down. I've also had a customer recently that he had to put his hand over the photo eye to get the carriage to raise to the top of the load, to where he would remove his hand and the film carriage would go back down. All of these issues can easily be fixed by performing PMs, bringing your technicians in, doing your service work. The other issues that we've seen is sometimes signaling distance from the unit. If you have a long pallet, sometimes a 60-inch long pallet, the tower is a good distance away from the product, and it may miss certain parts of that pallet. Also, coloration of the boxes. Certain photo eyes only will register a lighter product, and dark boxes, if your customer switches to maybe a specialty print dark box, the photo eye may not be able to see the film or see the box when it's wrapping. All right, film clamp systems and their common problems. So we've seen a lot of issues with film clamps. Some can be gear driven, some can be pneumatic, or having air pressure cause the film clamps to open and close. Traditionally, we've seen that either there's not enough film in the clamp, there's too much tension on startup, it's not catching the film in the right position, or the wiper arm isn't actually bringing the film to the clamp. So timing's everything. These can be small changes on the inside of the tower and the control panel. Sometimes they can just be an air pressure sensor that needs to be adjusted or replaced. A lot of these film clamp systems, the timing of it may need to be done by a factory trained technician. So here are common clamp issues that we see, and these came straight from customers out in the field. On the left two pictures, the customer was originally using more of a sandpaper type tape. I think of it more as what you would see on a skateboard, grip tape, and a rubberized piece of material that is held on by electrical tape to try to grip the film. We're having a ton of issues with film breakage and damage because either the abrasive grip tape at the bottom of the clamp would cause tears and rips, or it wouldn't catch the film in between the rubberized material. This customer actually also had excessive tension on startups, so we had to delay that tension and fully replace the clamps. In the middle picture, all it is metal on metal contact, and there's nothing to really grip the film. Just adding a rubberized hose or pipe, which can be done by your factory trained technician, is the easiest solution to a situation like this. The customer may actually want to upgrade his clamp system and replace it altogether. And then on the right two pictures, improper fitting or breakage of the rubber grabber inside that film clamp can also provide issues too. So one of the big things that I hear people talk about is pre-stretch versus on pallet stretch. They are not the same thing. So pre-stretch is the mechanical function of the equipment that results from different size gears and the drive rollers. That's the pre-stretch gear and pre-stretch gear ratios are held inside the top cover of the carriage. The on-pallet stretch is what is actually laid on the product later. It is not possible to manipulate pre-stretch unless you completely change the gears and the gear ratio inside the carriage. And you can know, here's how you calculate an example of how you calculate pre-stretch percent by doing a little math equation. So if you're looking at the same size roller OD, same size drive rollers inside the carriage, you're going to count the teeth. If, for example, the large sprocket has 39 teeth and the small sprocket has 13 teeth, you're going to subtract out the small sprocket teeth count and divide it by the small sprocket teeth count, giving you a 200% gear after you multiply by 100. But certain machines will have different teeth counts. For example, a 36 and 12 will also be a 200% pre-stretch gear. But we call pre-stretch gear and pre-stretch gear ratio F1. And when you put it together with the tension, the rotational speed, the carriage speed, that is F2, which should give you your on-pallet stretch. So on-pallet stretch is the stretch percentage achieved on the load after secondary forces have been applied to the film. Rotational speed and tension are F2. And we look to diagnose the equipment's performance based on a negative, neutral, or positive post-stretch situation in real time in front of your customer. So we do this by measuring the feet of stretched film divided by the feet of unstretched film. Subtract out 1 for your initial film that's in there, multiply by 100, and you get your on-pallet stretch. So the example that we're looking at is if your piece of equipment is running a 200% pre-stretch gear and we're only getting 150% on pallet stretch, that 50% gap from pre-stretch to on pallet stretch is going to tell me that there's an issue. It may be a tension issue. It may be a piece of a component of the equipment that has an issue, cut rollers or sprockets and chains or anything that we've talked about previously. If we go from a 200% gear ratio to a 195 on pallet, that shows that the machine is working in perfect unison, it's optimized, and it's running properly. It's a great way to diagnose equipment issues in front of the customer in real time. There's also problems behind the curtain that I and the Paragon team are not factory trained technicians and cannot perform. This is something that you would need to have your technicians during a PM come look at. Examples include blown boards, incorrect voltages, bushing motors, PLCs, ring belts. This is all going to be stuff that they are more capable of handling than the Paragon team is able to. So our client analysis, when we come to an audit, just to kind of recap a little bit, we're going to look for condition of rollers. We're going to check the chains and sprockets. We're going to check and see if there's residue on a cut wire, if that's available on that piece of equipment. We're going to look at the control panel. Is the tension turned down? Is the turntable speed up very high? How are the wrap patterns? Are they wrapping 6 wraps top, 6 wraps bottom? We're going to watch film as it rolls through the carriage onto the pallet during the initial run. Does it look loose? Is there tiger striping? Is there issues with the dancer bar? Could there be a load cell issue? Or learn about any prior issues or maintenance that's been performed. Sometimes your customers are the best way to help diagnose the issues because they're used to working on that equipment every day. It's a great way during our audit to keep you involved and help sell that preventative maintenance schedule with your technicians. So equipment performance is key. You can have the greatest stretch film in the world, but if your equipment is very poor and outdated and damaged, it's hard to get high performance stretch without having a great piece of equipment working in unison together. So knowing the basic components of equipment, understanding how to diagnose potential issues, and being prepared to provide solutions is the best way to optimize equipment with film for your customer and give a true value added experience to them. Here is a quick recap of the film carriage issues that we've talked about. These are also going to be in PDF form. If any of you would like a copy of these just to keep as a cheat sheet, please reach out to me directly. I'll give you my contact information here in a second. And we can get you a copy of these just to keep with you to help diagnose possible issues at your current customers. So once again, I wanted to thank you for your time today looking at equipment, the possible issues and solutions that we can bring to customers, how to incorporate factory trained technicians into the value added sell. My name is Zack Poole, and once again, I cover the state of Georgia, and I do some surrounding area work in Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Florida. If you have any questions about the presentation today, please feel free to reach out to me directly or reach out to your local sales rep. Alan, Adam, Sean, and Carla, they'd be very happy to get you these PDFs, work with you on a customer that may have equipment issues to help diagnose what the best course of action is. We're available and ready to help in any way we can. Thank you so much.